Hi, I'm Dr. Ann Arnett.
And I'm Dr. Ginny Peisch. We're both clinical psychologists and researchers at Boston Children's Hospital.
And this is Answers Through Research, ADHD. In every episode, we'll discuss research related to ADHD, and then we'll talk about how you can apply the findings at home with your own family.
So let's get started.
So we wanted to talk about neuropsychological functioning in ADHD. Now, neuropsychological functioning is a big term that describes how a child performs or any individual performs on cognitive tests. So these are tests of things like processing speed, or how quickly can someone make sense of simple information and do something with it, or working memory, how well can you hold information in your mind and do something with it, inhibitory control, or controlling your impulses, and cognitive flexibility, shifting between tasks or roles. Kids with ADHD tend to have more difficulty on the tests that we use to measure those different skills. They tend to have a little bit slower processing speed and more difficulty with working memory, inhibitory control, and flexibility. So once upon a time, many well-known researchers thought that ADHD was due to just a single difficulty in one of those areas. They thought that all children had difficulty with processing speed or inhibitory control or working memory. There was some debate about what the actual challenge was. But in the early 2000s, a guy named Bruce Pennington, who just happened to be my advisor in graduate school, proposed that actually maybe ADHD is due to multiple challenges, and he described the multiple deficit model. And the idea behind this model is that kids with ADHD have sort of additive challenges across all those domains. So they may have weaker performance across multiple domains, and that adds up to account for their ADHD symptoms. As it turns out, that did explain some of the individual variability in ADHD, about 30%, but there's still quite a bit of variance there to be explained, quite a bit of variance left over. So, since then, we have realized that actually ADHD is quite heterogeneous, meaning there are a lot of individual differences, particularly in neuropsychological profiles. And researchers, including myself, have tried to figure out whether some of the patterns in neuropsychological performance and the individual differences in those patterns might be useful in understanding both the cause of ADHD at the brain level, as well as individual differences in some of the challenges that kids with ADHD have. So in one study, which we recently published, we took a large sample of children, twins actually, and we tested their neuropsychological functioning, and then we used a clustering analysis, it's called latent class analysis, to identify 5 different profiles of neuropsychological performance. So basically, 5 different patterns of performance on a bunch of neuropsychological tests. And what we found was that kids with the red, the yellow, the blue, and the green profiles, these variable profiles where they had some strengths and some challenges in their performance, those kids were more likely to have ADHD. So variability itself was related to ADHD. In contrast, the kids with the relatively flat black line, those kids were less likely to have ADHD. So altogether, this finding tells us that there really is heterogeneity or individual differences in neuropsychological functioning in kids with ADHD. And some kids may actually have really strong processing speed or working memory, while that may be an area of relative weakness for other kids. So Dr. Peisch, given all this, what can we tell the families at home that would be helpful as they approach this new school year?
It's a good question. So that graph highlights that most kids with ADHD have vulnerabilities in at least one cognitive domain. So maybe that's working memory, maybe it's processing speed, maybe it's both. And if we think about these skills, they are really essential to good functioning in a classroom environment. You have to be able to pay attention, you have to be able to complete tasks. So not surprisingly, kids with ADHD sometimes struggle academically. And so we have something called 504 plans or IEP plans at school that kids with ADHD can qualify for to sort of help support them with some of that functional impairment that they might have in the classroom environment. One thing that's really important to keep in mind, the bottom line of all of this research, is that no kid with ADHD is like the next kid with ADHD. So there's a lot of individual variability. So when we create these 504 or IEP plans, we really want to make sure that they're tailored to each child's need. So at home you might be wondering, well, how do I know what my child's strengths or weaknesses are? You can easily consult a neuropsych testing report that maybe has been done in the past for your kid, or if that isn't available, you can ask the teachers and talk to them about what they've noticed about your child in the classroom. You can also make your own observations. So if you've noticed at home that your child really struggles with multiple step directions, so getting their backpack from upstairs, that might be indicative of deficits or vulnerabilities in working memory. Similarly, if you've noticed that your kid really struggles to complete tasks and it takes them a really long time to get through simple tasks, or what seems to be simple, then they might be having challenges with processing speed, and they might need some supports for that area.
Okay, great. So it sounds like neuropsych testing isn't even really necessary, assuming your child is generally doing well and you are able to observe them and gather observations from the teacher as well about where their challenges might be. So if you have a good sense of what your child's strengths and challenges are, how can you apply those to a 504 plan or an IEP?
That's a really good question. So there are a ton of different recommendations and accommodations that we can build into 504 and IEP plans. And this would simply just be too much time to cover them all, so I just want to highlight a few today. The bottom line is that it's going to be really important to tailor the plan to your child's needs, as I said earlier. But thinking about working memory, for example, so a kid who struggles keeping multiple pieces of information in mind, we could help a kid out by giving them preferential seating, so seating them in the front of the classroom where a teacher can maybe check in on them more regularly and see whether they've understood the instruction and can maybe provide some reminders. Similarly, a kid who struggles with processing speed, so getting through an amount of work, we can support them by maybe giving them some extra time on tests or tasks. So sometimes we see extended time or even being able to take a test in a separate room where they're less distracted by the progress that their peers have made, or less discouraged by that. So those are just two examples.
Excellent. Well, that's it for today. If you have questions or want to learn more, please contact us at the link below.
And we'll see you next time.